Welcome, this is Jim, host of the Faith Influencer podcast, where we're going to dive into discussions on faith's role in everyday life, from navigating blended families to overcoming challenges. I'm a husband, a father, a Bible teacher, an advocate for applying faith to everyday life. So tune in as I share personal stories, valuable insights, and practical wisdom. This is Jim. Welcome to Faith Influencer. I'm excited to walk you through what really was a life changer for me as we talk about blended families. As a matter of fact, I'm going to walk you through what I personally walked through. And maybe we ought to call this lessons from Lanny, because these are some things that I discovered by sitting with Lanny, who I told you last time was a counselor. He was a marriage counselor, but in particular, he helped those who had gone through divorce and who were getting ready to enter a new relationship, and blended families, and children were going to be a part of it. And he knew that there were many rules that must be followed to be successful. But what he showed me as he began writing this on the whiteboard was that there are some things I had to unpack myself, and I may not know they're there, but they are, he assured me. So it was a life-changing experience that I walked through. Some of it's not easy to talk about, to be honest, but we're going to do it because I think it will help you. So let's walk through, and I'm going to call the big four things I found in my own suitcase that you might discover in yours as well. And then how Lanny taught me how to deal with them. And as a result of that, I entered into a new relationship, a new marriage, his, her, and now our kids. And we're 15 years in. So I'm so thankful for what I learned during those times, and I didn't carry all of this baggage in. So let's walk through these. And here's number one, and you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about, because I promise you, this is one of the things that is inevitable for all of us who have been through this, and it is dealing with guilt. Guilt may be the number one thing that we all find in our suitcase that we need to unpack. I struggled with this. There was no question that I struggled with this. There were some other things that Lanny talked about that perhaps I didn't struggle with so much, but this is at the top of the list for all of us. Now, here's what I discovered. I discovered it didn't matter if you felt like you were at fault or not at fault in your previous breakup. The effect was the same. Didn't matter. The effect was the same. We all have guilt. So I was experiencing this guilt, and I didn't know how to deal with this guilt. And Lanny broke it down in two different ways. He said, one, you have reasonable guilt, and this is the guilt that you feel like you deserve. And I felt like I deserved a lot of guilt here, because it didn't matter where I found myself in this breakup. I felt that much of it was on me. There's always two sides, right? I haven't talked to anyone who questioned that. There's always two sides. But Lanny said, Jim, the person who has reasonable guilt is the person who feels like it was mostly their fault. So there are some of you who, like me, feel like you should have done something different. It was on you. It was in your power to not let this happen. That's how I felt. So I was feeling what Lanny termed as reasonable guilt. It was in my control to do more. Well, that's a big guilt. Lanny said the other guilt is unreasonable guilt. Unreasonable guilt, it's more like the victim mentality. It's more like this happened to you. I didn't feel that personally, but a lot of people do. It's the side effects. It's the fallout of divorce. And sometimes maybe it's unjustified, but it doesn't matter. Remember, the effect is the same for all of us. Sometimes, even if you were more of a victim, maybe your spouse had an affair, maybe they abused you, whatever you went through, sometimes you feel like, well, here I am. This is what I felt. I'm raising two daughters by myself now. That was my situation. It's just me and them. They're young teenagers. And what do I know about raising teenage girls by myself? Nothing. It was trial and error. My oldest daughter, who at the time was 15, She helped me a lot with her younger sister, my younger daughter, but that's where I was. And I felt guilty that they were in this position. So it's that guilt thing that captivates our mind, and it's difficult to overcome. But here's where it showed up. I found myself what I'm going to call guilt parenting. Now, you know what I'm talking about because you've done it too. And it's where we start trying to make up for the loss that we feel like our kids have experienced. So I started guilt parenting, and guilt parenting looks like this. I'll give you an example. I had this little bitty Mazda convertible car. It was this old car that I call my Saturday car. I like to drive it around. And my daughter, when she turned 16, started driving. She wanted to drive it by herself. And it was a stick shift, and she was just learning. I did not want her to take my Saturday car. I wanted to say no, but I felt like, you know what? You've been through a lot. Yes, take it. But that went on to other things as well that were not for her benefit. I was guilt parenting, and I felt like I couldn't say no. And I felt like you got to do whatever you wanted to do because I've hurt you. That's really what it comes down to. Whether you're at fault or not, you feel like you hurt them. That's what I was feeling. So when you guilt parent, let me tell you what you're doing. Let me tell you what I did. I was raising, and I did it more with my oldest daughter. She was the trial and error. I was teaching her that the world was centered around her. That's what I was teaching her. That's not reality. I was teaching her that she got whatever she wanted. So it was an eye-opening thing to learn, to realize that I'm guilt parenting. And then I came to this conclusion. You know what? I'm the parent. It is not my job, even though they've been through some difficult times. It's not my job to be her buddy now. She still needed a parent. She still needed a dad. She still needed direction. She still needed strength. She didn't need someone to give in to her. So maybe you're like me. Maybe you are in that position of guilt parenting, or maybe you've already remarried and the spouse you're married to is guilt parenting, and you see it and you know what's happening and you know what's going to happen to their child, and they haven't unpacked that before you got together. And so what do? Hang on, we're going to deal with that. Here's the second thing that I struggled with. This unresolved, unpacked suitcase leads to what Lanny said is probably the second most difficult thing, and it's anger. And it really depends on what position you're in, but I was experiencing anger. But the problem with anger is that anger, there's a justified anger. There's an okay anger. I was angry at what we'd been through. I was really angry at my piece of it and her piece of it. I was angry at all of that. That's normal, I discovered. Lanny led me down this path to realize that many of the emotions that I was going through, that they were not bad, they were normal. As a matter of fact, that might be helpful for you to realize that if you're experiencing guilt, that's normal to an extent. That if you're experiencing anger, that's normal as well. But all of these can be taken too far. So my anger at the situation was turning into bitterness. And here's what bitterness is. Bitterness was an unwillingness to turn loose, to let it go. That's what bitterness is, unwillingness to let it go. There are some things that I felt justified in being angry at, but it was affecting me. It was affecting my temperament. Even though I felt justified, I felt like I have a right to be angry about this. You know what I'm talking about? You feel like you have a right to be angry. You feel like they deserve my anger. They deserve my wrath. That's how I felt at times. It's okay to feel this anger, but then here's something Lanny taught me. I'll never forget it because it was pointed. As a matter of fact, it stunned me when Lanny told me this about my own anger. He said, this is what he said. He said, Jim, your anger does not hurt the one who wronged you. It hurts the ones you love. Wow. So that hit me right there. So I determined that my anger at someone that it didn't even hurt any longer was unreasonable. And I turned loose of it with Lanny's help. Maybe you've experienced it. So this dealing with anger is a tough one. It's really hard. But think about this. I mean, why did I want to stay in a cage with a lion? Why did I want to walk out into a street of oncoming traffic? That's what you're doing when you're hanging on to this anger. You're just putting yourselves in these positions that's hurting everyone else and hurting you. Here's one of the things that I justified this with. So my dad's parents divorced, and he was always a guy that had a temper. And we used to say, yeah, that's just dad. Dad, he just has a short fuse. He just has a temper. I use that as an excuse for a while. Well, I'm just like my dad. An excuse. By the way, if you're doing that, it's an excuse. You have to get rid of that because it's hurting those around you. So I realized that was an excuse and it was out of control, and it was something that was passed down, and I had to unpack it, but I had to get honest about it. Sometimes it's hard to get honest about these things. Now the hard part. The hard part is that when you're dealing with anger and you're dealing with these disappointments, the hardest part is forgiving yourself. See, what I didn't know is that I was probably more than anyone, I was angry at me. I was angry at me. I was disappointed in myself. You remember that I told you that I was in ministry. This doesn't happen to me. This is what I counseled everyone else about. But now I'm there. And so I was having to take my own advice. But now it was personal. So I'm learning as I was walking through this. But I realized as hard as I tried, I promise, I could not go back and undo it. Too late. I couldn't go back and undo it. You can't go back and undo some of these things. That doesn't mean, though, you have to be stuck there. I was stuck there for a while, but Lanny helped me get out of it. That's what I'm wanting to do with all of you. I want to help you get out of it. You don't have to be stuck there. You just have to learn. In this case, you have to learn to forgive yourself. This is the hard part. Releasing yourself, turning loose yourself. That's going to be maybe the most difficult thing that you experience. Do this. Get alone, talk out loud. Now, Lanny helped me through this because I had all this going on in my head. Lanny said, Jim, I want you to go where there's no one. Go in your backyard, walk around your backyard, start talking out loud, start talking to God, start letting these feelings and these thoughts come out loud, though. You have to hear yourself saying this. You have to do it out loud. So I trusted Lanny, and that's what I did. And I began to release these emotions. And I realized that as I talked through it, I became more reasonable. And I realized that I couldn't change what had happened in the past. I couldn't go back. I couldn't undo it. But at the same time, I heard Lanny speaking in my head, it's a new day. And so Lanny said, Jim, here's your new motto. Here's your new motto. And maybe I can pass this on. This is your new motto. This is what I learned from Lanny. He said, I want you to start saying this every time those thoughts come to your mind. He said, Jim, every time those feelings rise up again, and they're still there, as you can tell, they don't go away. I can go there and feel them again. He said, Jim, here's your new motto. From now on. From now on. I can't go back and redo that. Can't. Those areas that were on me and that I blew it, I can't undo it. Can't change it. But from now on. So that was my new motto. That was my new motto with my new wife. That was my new motto with my children. I can't undo any of the difficulty and pain that it caused you, but from now on. So maybe that's your motto. That's Lanny's advice. That's kind of heavy. So let me go to another one. Here's another area of grief. Maybe we want to call it sadness. So I'm walking through these things, thankfully with help from Lanny. I'm walking through these areas of emotions. And Lanny said, now let me describe to you, Jim, what else you're going to experience. You're going to experience severe sadness on this journey. And I was like, thanks, Lanny. I'm looking forward to this. But he said, this is why. Because he said, who wakes up one day and says, you know what I've dreamed of all these years, to have this great relationship and this marriage and all of these wonderful things, this idealism, and then one day it shattered. When I say one day, I don't mean it happened in one day. It happened over time, but one day it shattered. No one gets married with that idea. We have this ideal, and ideals rarely work out. In my case, it didn't work out. So he said, you're going to begin to experience the death of a dream. And he said, it's sadness. Now, I learned that it's okay to be sad. It's normal. Probably more sadness for my children. It breaks your heart. I mean, if you think about it, they don't have their mommy and daddy any longer sitting there with them playing games. Now that's broken. So you feel sadness for your children. By the way, let me insert this right now, okay? If you're feeling this, I'm not trying to drag you down into despair. I promise you know the feelings that I'm describing. But children are resilient. Thankfully, I learned that, and we're not going to talk about that now. That's coming later. But I don't want to leave you hanging with this sadness. Children are resilient. And I learned they bounce back so much better than what we think they do. They forgive and move on and love and accept so much better than what we ever imagined. So children are resilient. Let me just throw that in. So you have to be careful of putting yourself in position. So here's what happened to me. This may be the most devastating moment I had in the area of sadness all these years. It was, and I'm going to try not to get sad as I'm describing it to you. But as I said, that stuff's still there. And you know as well as I do that it doesn't take much to pull this up again. Even though if you've resolved these issues, these feelings, they're still there. It was my birthday. And so we were gathered together and my daughters were there, and they love their dad and they want to do something special for their dad. And so I opened up this present, and it was a collage. Now, my daughter didn't know it was going to do what it did to me, but it was a collage. It was all of these pictures from the time they were baby on up. Gosh, it broke me. I remember when I looked at this, tears started coming down my eyes. And I think it surprised my daughter because that wasn't what she expected. It was a happy thing for her. Children don't always take it as bad as we take it. You see what I'm going through here? But when I looked at this, it just shoved me down memory lane of all of these innocent faces and wonderful times in the past and all of that. And that's how it hit me. I literally picked that up and I just had to walk out of the room and walk to the bedroom and get my composure and spend some time there. there's just no way around the emotions of sadness going through this. So it's a tough one, and it's a tough one to hide, and you're going to go through it. But here's what Lanny said. He said, you have to be careful. Experience sadness. You have to experience all these. Be honest. Don't act like they're not there. But he said, you can't let sadness go too far. So my question maybe is like your questions, Lanny, what's too far for sadness? And he said, this is where sadness has gone too far. When sadness turns into despair. And I said, explain, Lanny. And he said, what it means is that your sadness has so overwhelmed you, you feel like there's no hope. That's despair. It turns into this hopelessness. And that's I'm going to say I was on the verge of that. I don't know where you are. I was on the verge of that. But because of Lanny's help, I came out of that. Last thing that I want to say I really had to deal with, and I've already mentioned it, but I want to mention it again, is I needed to forgive myself. But here's the part that's going to maybe get to you a little bit. As a matter of fact, this might take you in an area where you're going to question, should you do this or not? I had to ask forgiveness from my previous spouse. That's tricky. How you do that, her response wasn't on me. How she reacted didn't matter. I had to do this. I needed to be released from this. For my part that I'm responsible for, I had to do this. So now let me say, if you're in this situation, you've remarried, you got to be really careful here. I hope you have the open relationship with your spouse now, your new spouse, that you can talk to him or her and let them know what you feel like you need to do. And then it depends on your relationship with your ex-spouse, how you handle this. It might be that you just need to write an email, not do it in person, and express only your part of the responsibility. Don't bring up their part, what they might be responsible for. That's not on you. It's what you're responsible for. And then, and I only bring this up because in the years of counseling, this happened. If you've been through this and you've had a previous spouse that you've gone through a divorce, but now that previous spouse has passed away. I had someone ask me in a counseling session, how do I deal with that? Because I never got to ask them for forgiveness. How do I deal with that? And if that's you, let me tell you how you handle that. You take an empty chair and you put it in front of you. And you take that spouse, and in your imagination, you put them in that chair. And you talk to them. And you ask them for forgiveness. And you tell them whatever it is that you need to tell them. And then you release yourself. You've done all you can do. That's how you deal with someone who's already passed away. But do that. Do it alone. It might feel strange, but do that. That's how you deal with that. So we're walking this journey of what it's like for blended families, and it's not easy. And we have to deal with ourselves first and unpack our baggage. So welcome to the club. Welcome to the streets, because I've walked down this street. So I know what you're going through. And we're going to continue discussing this. So this is Jim with Faith Influencer.